The broadcast is now starting. All attendees are in listen-only mode.
Welcome, everyone. I now call this meeting of the Somerville City Council to order. In accordance with Chapter 107 of the Acts of 2023, this meeting of the City Council may be conducted via remote participation, and please note that video and audio of this meeting is being recorded and may be shown live on local access government channels and on the City of Somerville website and will be available for future review. Will the clerk please call the roll?
This is roll call. Councillor McLaughlin. Here. Councillor Davis.
Here.
Councillor Scott.
Present.
Councillor Strezzo.
Here.
Councillor Klingon. Councillor Wilson.
Present.
Councillor Burnley.
Present. Present.
Let's try that again. Councillor Burnley.
Present.
We'll get that right one of these years. Councillor Gomez Morcad. Councillor Kelly.
Present.
Councillor Pineda Neufeld. Councillor Ewan Campen.
Here.
With 8 councillors present and 3 absent, we have a quorum.
Thank you very much. So as you can see, Councillor Burnley is joining us remotely, which will mean that we'll have to lay things on the table and do a big vote at the end. Councillor Klingon is attending an important Ward 4 community event and isn't able to join us tonight. And Councillor Gomez Moacad is on her way here from the Traffic Commission meeting. She also serves as our representative on the Traffic Commission, and their meeting ran a little bit late, but she will be here. Pursuant to our rule, number 32, let it be known that this City Council salutes the flag of the United States of America, and let us recall our oath to uphold the Constitution and the laws of the Commonwealth to the best of our abilities and understanding. We will begin with a moment of silence. Do any councillors have community members that they would like us to remember tonight? Seeing none, everyone who's able, please rise. Thank you. You may be seated. So, colleagues, after our one public hearing tonight, we have 4 items that we're going to take out of order. We're going to start with item 9.47, which is a sponsored speaker from the Community Action Agency of Somerville. After that, we'll take up a number of items from the administration. 7.8 is introducing the council to our new Chief Administrative Officer. After that is a presentation on the council, how to request interpretation services. And after that is an introduction to the compensation study, the municipal compensation study. We'll be joined by our consultant virtually. And after that, we will return to the regular order of business. So with that in mind, let's take up our first item, please.
Item 1.3 is approval of the minutes of the regular meeting of April 13th, 2023.
Seeing no discussion, we will lay those on the table for approval.
Item 3.1 is a grant of location from Verizon to install 50 feet of conduit in Willow Avenue from utility pole 198/13 to a point of pickup at 110 Willow Avenue.
I now declare this public hearing open. Is there anyone from the public wishing to speak on this item? Mr. Bilodeau? You just need to unmute.
Sure. Sorry about that. Good evening. My name is Ross Bilodeau. I'm representing Verizon New England. I'm here to answer any questions that may come up.
Is there anyone else from the public wishing to speak on this item? Seeing none, we will close the public hearing. Are there questions? Councillor Davis.
Thank you, Mr. President. Through you to the representative, can we just share a little bit more about what the purpose of the request is?
Absolutely. Verizon is looking to place 1 4-inch conduit underneath Willow Street from an existing pole 13 located on the easterly side of Willow Ave over to 110 Willow Ave, where we will be met by customer-placed conduit to provide service to 110 Willow Ave. That customer being Eversource. They had requested underground service, fiber, etc. be run to this property as it is a high voltage area, and they don't want overhead lines going to that building that don't exist already.
Okay, thank you very much.
All right. Seeing no further questions, that item is approved.
Thank you very much.
That will take us to the first item that we're going to take out of order, which is item 9.47, public communication from the Community Action Agency of Somerville, conveying a report on housing advocacy efforts.
Councilor McLaughlin.
Thank you, Mr. President. This came from a recent order I put in regarding how the city and ISD can work better to address tenant protections. And in committee, it came into a greater conversation about what the city can do to work with community groups like the Community Action Agency of Somerville to address tenant protections. So I was hoping to have a few moments to let Nicole Egbert, who works in Cass, Ward 1 resident, talk about the tenant protections and the advocacy they're doing, and maybe just have a brief conversation and refer it to committee so we can talk more about how we can all work better together. So I'd like to sponsor Ms. Egbert.
Excellent. Ms. Egbert, thank you for joining us tonight. Your mic is on, please.
Okay, great. Thanks so much, Councilor McLaughlin and council members for having me this evening. So hopefully you got this attachment. This is an anti-displacement research report, and Councilor McLaughlin said I had 5 minutes, and so I just want to talk high level about the process of anti-displacement research that our staff are doing and volunteers, some of the data that we found, as well as the barriers and recommendations and ways that we hope to continue partnering with OHS, the city, and the council. So as folks may know, CAS is grant funded by the City of Somerville through the OHS Tenant Organizing and Outreach Grant to do anti-displacement organizing. We all know that gentrification and rising costs of housing continue to have a severe impact on tenants. And so we've been in close communication with other housing stability partners and legal services. And one of the strategies we realized we need to employ was trying to reach tenants upstream as early as possible. So last August, we began launching a primarily volunteer-led effort called the Anti-Displacement Research Team. This is coordinated by my staff, Isabel, who uses they and them pronouns. And essentially, our volunteers come together on a rotating basis to research buildings for sale, multi-unit properties here in Somerville. And we use public records to do this. So we search Zillow, Mass Land Records, and we really try to track the deed changes. And we also do some in-person sightings. You know, I think all of us walk around and constantly see for sale signs. So we have a variety of spreadsheets where we're tracking this. And then we use other publicly available information to try to determine if the building is occupied for tenants, and therefore if those tenants are at risk of being evicted and displaced. And in the next stage, we then send our staff organizers and now trained volunteers to canvass these units and knock on the doors and meet the neighbors and try to tell them about their rights, tell them about what CAS does, and really encourage the tenants to organize and advocate. So. Yeah, we started out last August, and I'm thrilled to say that we have a group of 30 volunteers working on this project. Between August and May, they've contributed roughly 225 hours of volunteer time to this project. And I really want to emphasize that our data are rough estimates because, a lot of these sales are likely underrepresented because of how many transactions are not publicized. But since the summer, we have tracked 256 multi-unit building sales in the city. That was the question that came up in the Housing and Community Development Committee, and again, inspired us then to reach out to Councilor McLaughlin and put this report together. 256 multi-unit building sales since August, and of those buildings, we have contacted 133 of them, either through in-person literature drops, actual canvassing door knocking, or mailing them. And in the appendix of this report, you can see the multilingual building sale letter that we have together. So again, we're really trying to meet tenants before this crisis as much as possible. I'll also mention that you're probably wondering, how are volunteers qualified to do this? And so our staff has really put together a great series of trainings to get volunteers oriented. So any volunteer who wants to join this research team has to learn how to use the databases, And then they're kind of on these independent rotating shifts. Volunteers are also trained in canvassing, like best practices in safety. We've also done renters' rights trainings to give that bigger context. And then we have ongoing monthly meetings and check-ins. Yeah, and from there, that process, we're hoping will lead to more tenants getting organized and, again, not self-evicting themselves, because that, again, is like underreported. I'm not sure if it's untrackable, but it's been really hard to get that data as well, really understanding like how many Somerville residents are being pushed out because they don't think they can fight a rent increase or a building sale. So the last few things I want to just highlight here, yeah, the barriers section of this report is pretty long. You know, there's only so much that a volunteer-led initiative can do, and a lot of the issues for us come down to gaps in information. And so I guess to focus more so on our future hopes and recommendations, you know, we have listed some city-level policy recommendations, very high level, but we're hoping that things like requiring notice of when buildings are put up for sale. I know that's a little difficult given like the rent control ban and you know, legal ramifications around the condo conversion ordinance, but we know that could do huge things for tenants. We would love to see you know, the bottlenecks currently in the Affordable Housing Acquisition Trust Fund really identified and remediated if possible. You know, Councilor Ben Campen and I actually visited a building a month ago that was on the market. There's a tenant right there that I'm working with who's at risk. She's a Section 8 voucher holder, single mom, and the building sold in less than 2 weeks. So it's really difficult for nonprofits like Justice Start, SCC, and SCLT, the Community Land Trust, to compete with that, right? And so we're curious if there are ways that these acquisition funds can be released sooner. And we've also suggested, you know, can the housing division or another city entity help build greater awareness with Somerville property owners about donating, selling, and deeding to nonprofits, right? Or could they be the ones sending letters about, like, yeah, your options when you decide to sell your building? So yeah, I really appreciate all of the members' partnership, you know, and we ask for your continued communication in identifying buildings in your ward, as well as these city-level policies that will close these information gaps. So, you know, letting us know about rent hikes you're hearing about, building sales, redevelopment, any of those types of conditions that you know might lead to displacement. And yeah, just thank you for helping us continue to build as well a culture of empowered tenants here in the city.
Questions, comments? Councilor Strezzo.
Thank you, Mr. President. Through you to our speaker, thank you for being here tonight and for updating us on this. You mentioned Section 8 and this single mother that was at risk of displacement. Wanted to hear your thoughts on what Cass and your efforts has been to expand the Section 8 stock in the city. As we know, a lot of Section 8 voucher holders in our community often are displaced out of Somerville despite desperately trying to stay in our community. So I wanted to hear your thoughts on that and what efforts or interest Cass and your efforts have been to really help. Like how can we work together with that? I'd love to hear your thoughts.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, thanks, Councilor Strezzo. So I think Cass, again, has actually been more on the crisis remediation side of the Section 8 tenants. Admittedly, this case that I'm working on is actually the first displacement case that our team has worked on in this context. However, my colleagues in the housing advocacy program who deliver rental assistance and help tenants find affordable housing, they really struggle with the Section 8 housing search. We've had many clients at Cass who are given their Section 8 voucher from the Housing Authority, and then after that 3-month period have struggled so much to try to get leased up and find a landlord who will accept it that they often need to like advocate for an extension or something else. So Yeah, so that's to say on the organizing side, we actually haven't heard from too many Section 8 tenants about being displaced, but we know that it's really difficult to get leased up here with a voucher. And I believe, though, it's the Somerville Homeless Coalition who administers like the summer VIP program, which is supposed to be an incentive.
Mr. President, through you to Nicole, thank you so much for that. Yes, and wanted to know if CAS had interest in expanding the summer VIP program, as it has been, from what I've heard, like to expand the Section 8 stock, and what, so CAS has taken efforts, or is more Somerville Housing Coalition?
Yeah, I think my understanding is that it's the Homeless Coalition who administers the incentive program. So I can't speak on behalf of CAS's interest. I'd have to talk to our executive director, David Gibbs, about that. But CAS was recently awarded the municipal housing voucher program, the new one, right? So again, my colleague is Ashley Tinkin. She's the one who's going to be really overseeing that. But we think that's, that's our local version of Section 8. So we absolutely will be embarking in that process. Yeah.
Councillor Kelly.
Thank you, Mr. President. I just want to thank you for coming and giving this report. Many folks know that my building was one of the buildings that got purchased and was put into this terribly precarious situation where folks were getting displaced, whether that's, we want to use the term self-eviction or displacement. Ultimately, it was a, I think, 14, 16 unit building that was far below market rent, and all of those folks had to leave. And I just want to commend CAS for the work that they did to help organize that building, to fight back against some really tough conditions when it did get sold, some illegal activity that happened in the building. And I know that those folks were so grateful that you were able to kind of step in and fill in the gap. And, I'm so curious how this research continues, because I think this piece that you're highlighting in terms of the speculative real estate market and the way that it's impacting the city of Somerville and, our building, if we had had a little bit more time, a little bit more infrastructure, a little bit more resources, would have been the perfect applicant for the municipal voucher program, right? 16 units in one place below market value with tenants who would have loved to stay. You probably could have brought in new tenants who could have filled those units, and instead, most of those units are now empty. All of them will be empty by the end of the rental cycle. I know for us, our rent doubled when we had to leave our apartment, and I can't imagine what's going to happen to that building now. So whatever we can do to help, this piece around speculative building purchases, I really think we have to find some solutions on. Of course, it's really difficult with the private market and not being able to regulate the private market, but whatever we can do to help this research is so critical. So thank you, and thank you for all the work that you do.
Councillor Wilson.
Yeah, thank you, Mr. President. Through you to Ms. Agbert. We've been hearing lately about the Somerville Anti-Displacement Task Force, and they have a residential displacement committee. I guess I'm curious to what extent there's any collaboration going on with them, and any plans for future collaboration with them.
Yeah, thanks, Councillor Wilson, and thanks, Councillor Kelly, for your comments, and yeah, that was a tough situation. But Councillor Wilson, I'm pleased to share with you, I'm actually a member of the task force with Councillor Ewan Campen, was part of the original membership of the task force. As you may know, the task force has been dormant, though, for about a year, so I'm very much looking forward to its relaunch in a week, and I'm still serving on the residential task force, and so I think this is going to position CAS really well in terms of not, being boots on the ground, but also hopefully having the system level view, as well as like taking the experiences and the, what we're hearing from tenants into this room where we're crafting policy that will hopefully change lives.
Thank you all. I'll just add, in addition to thanking you for being here tonight, I want to ask that you please convey our love to these 30 volunteers that are doing this work. You know, I'll just say on my own behalf, there was a large apartment building in Ward 3 that had a lot of long-term tenants. The building was sold to a developer who has just been trying to steamroll them out of there. I reached out to your team, this was probably over a year ago, and instantaneously, Cass's team was there knocking doors with translated material. I think it was the first time that anybody had contacted them in the language that they actually spoke, and has been continuously over the long haul working with those tenants to try to prevent them from getting evicted. So on behalf of my constituents, I just want to directly thank you for that work. Thank you for being here, and thank you for this report.
Yeah, thanks, Councilor Ewan-Campin. I'm pleased to share with you that we're still working with the one household. They're still in it and fighting. And yes, we are incredibly grateful for these 30 residents without whom this work wouldn't be possible. And you know, the biggest thing is just knowing that like neighbors are here to help other neighbors. So
thank you for being here tonight.
So much.
Next item, please.
The next,
Can we just make sure that gets referred to housing?
Oh, yes, that item is referred to Housing and Community Development.
thank you. And the next item that we'll take out of order is item 7.8, a request of the mayor requesting to appear to introduce Lamis Vargas, Chief Administrative Officer.
Excellent, please. Welcome.
Through the President, if I may make a brief comment before introducing our CEO. This item is to introduce the city's new Chief Administrative Officer, Lamis Vargas. As mentioned by the mayor during the FY23 budget, this position, similar to a Chief Operating Officer in the private sector, will increase the efficiency of our internal system and allow city workers to focus on providing high-quality services. With that, I'll let Chief Vargas introduce herself.
Good evening to the honorable members of the Somerville City Council, Council President. As just noted, my name is Lamis Vargas. I go by she, her pronouns. I am excited to be the City of Somerville's first Chief Administrative Officer. I am looking through this, forward through this role to working with the executive team, the entire Somerville staff, stakeholders, and the mayor to improve the day-to-day operations, the efficiencies of the city through strategies, project management, budgeting, implementation, compliance, and through IT infrastructures as well, where it is needed in order to increase city services in a more effective way to the residents and business owners of the city. Well, I just started this role. Upon my arrival, I have been conducting what I'm calling a listening tour, very much like a mini SWOT analysis with all the directors and department heads. Have not had the opportunity to meet with everyone just yet, but I am going down my list. And so the purpose of this is really to get an understanding of the department's procedures, its operations, get an understanding of their short-term and long-term goals within the department and their strategic plans, as well as getting a gauge on the projects that are currently in the pipeline as well. As a result, this will enable me to work towards developing on objectives, benchmarks, smooth workflows, and policies that will allow us to focus on areas where we need more attention and expand in areas where we're doing well and have room for improvement. That said, I would also like to provide you with a little bit of my professional background and experiences in the roles that I've played throughout government. I worked at all three levels of government, at the federal level, at the state level, and at the municipal level. Over the course of my career in various roles within government, recently in the Office of the Rhode Island General Treasurer, I've served as Senior Policy Advisor, as Deputy State Treasurer for the State of Rhode Island and Director of Unclaimed Property, as well as the Director of Administration and Deputy Secretary of State for the State of Rhode Island. Additionally, also currently serving as the Council Vice President in the City of Cranston, Rhode Island. During my time with the government, I've executed successful strategic plans. I've met benchmarks. I've served as member of the executive team. I've been part of many decisions making in professional capacity, where I have not only been involved in union negotiations, but have also been able to manage both union and non-union staff. I've written policies, rules and regulations, have reorganized staffing with the HR department, have reviewed staff performance, have initiated a lot of DEI training, including even translating documents. I am bilingual, and I am intermediate in American Sign Language as well. My background also encompasses RFPs, fine-tooth combing contracts, along with legal counsel, and being part of the fiscal operating budget process on the state level as well as the municipal level. I've had the pleasure of working alongside CFOs in overseeing audits of one of Treasury's division, as well as working with IT on cybersecurity. In terms of ordinance and legislations, I've not only testified in hearings, but I've also drafted municipal ordinances that are successfully implemented today, in addition to working collaboratively with staff on state legislations. And within the area of operations, I've also developed strategic processes and set goals across organizations for continued growth and performance improvement, particularly on the efficiencies in government. Now, this is just a small glimpse of my professional experience. I do look forward to meeting each and every one of you, answering any questions that you may have this evening, as well in the near future, getting feedback, working in collaboration with the City Council, because I know that's extremely important to make sure that we move the city forward as the city is growing, and so that we can deliver also the best customer service that we can as through the level of municipal government. I also wanted to thank you for your time in serving as public service. It's not an easy position to serve in, and I don't take that lightly in saying that. So thank you once again, and I'm more than happy to answer any questions that you may have.
Thank you very much. Thank you for being here tonight. Colleagues, what I'd like to do, take as many questions as we have tonight. If the conversation is going on for an extremely long time, we can follow it up in committee. But of course, if folks have questions, please shoot. I'll start with a couple.
Sure.
So this is a new role in the city. If one of us was asked by a constituent, what does the chief administrative officer actually do here in Somerville? What should we tell them?
Well, I'd say in a nutshell, a problem solver, if possible, right? I see this role as a way to describe it to a constituent who may not too familiar with it. Possibly to some, they may know it as a COO in certain sectors of government and in the private sector as well, or a nonprofit. I'd say that this role is making sure that the city services have little to no interruption. Everyone wants to make sure their trash gets picked up, the street gets plowed, street sweeping is taking place. Parks are looking well, but also that in parts of the IT side, that they can pay their bills and it could go as smooth as one can hope it goes.
Thank you. I have two more.
Sure.
How do you envision working with the City Council going forward?
As noted, I look forward in collaborating on so many different efforts, hearing feedback, suggestions, getting to know each and every one of you on what is some of your priorities, your constituents' priorities, what has worked, what has not worked, where there is room for improvement, and having an open line of communication.
Excellent. And my last question is I represent Ward 3, where there is a lot of street closures related to construction, and I'm wondering if your job will be involved with coordinating multiple street closures at the same time.
Sure. So the city is growing rapidly from what I've researched, from my observations and in conversations that I've also been having with department heads and staff as well at all different levels. I have to say that I am going to go back to the fact that I am starting to meet, I actually met with the DPW director. The point of contact for any department is not changing right now, I should say. It's still the same point of contact. If there is if your constituent would like to reach out to someone, that phone number has not changed, 301 has not changed. As I am, what I'm trying to put together is a 30-60 kind of 90 plan where I'm doing more of listening, observing, communicating, and getting feedback. If construction is one area that in fact you are concerned, you have concern, or your constituents, I'd be happy to meet with you, engaging in a conversation on how we can work together. Ultimately, a lot of departments, what I've been seeing, do a lot of overlapping. My hope is that the workflow system that is if it's not working, how do we fix it and address it? And if it's working, how do we improve and expand upon?
Thank you. Yes, I certainly look forward to working with you on that specific issue that I don't think just affects Ward 3.
Yeah. Thank you.
Oh, I'm sorry. Councillor Burnley has a question virtually. My apologies.
Am I audible?
We hear you.
Hello, thank you through the chair. I want to kind of follow up on the Council President's question.
Try now, Councillor.
Still one other person on mute, but okay, thank you. Am I audible?
Yes. If he could be turned up a little bit, please.
Okay. I was going to follow up through the chair on, I think, really two of the chair's questions around the position itself of CAO and the relationship with the council. I'm unaware if our new CAO has followed the conversation around the creation of this role. It's been referred to in many different ways by many different people. Some folks have said it's akin to a city manager. Some say it's not a city manager, it's a manager of the city. You yourself kind of refer to it as a COO, which, I personally, I'm not a big fan of the conflation of business and government. I don't think it's applicable or a good connection. But I'm very curious about this relationship between our two positions. In particular, as someone who has served in local government, I'm curious how you will think about the need for collaboration between the council in terms of implementing ordinances or initiatives that relate to policy that are spearheaded by the council.
Good evening, council member. In terms of the collaboration with the council members, if I'm understanding your question correctly, when it comes down to ordinances that are being introduced by the council member, is that your question? How would I be working with the council members on ordinance?
Well, ordinance implementation as well as policy initiatives as well, because through the chair, excuse me, there are times in which the council asks for, take for example, I had a constituent ask me about trying to have suite cleaning on around the high school be changed into after teachers arrive there, so that they don't have to lose parking spaces during the day. This would be something that we wouldn't implement via ordinance, but would require a conversation and in some potentially a push from the council towards the administration, city staff to get implemented. I'm curious how you see that working moving forward, given some of your previous experiences where you've been in the role of the local government pusher initiator. I hope that was clear.
Thank you. Absolutely. So first and foremost, again, as I mentioned in my early remarks, and that was I welcome feedback and communication with all council members, including even, to be quite honest with you, any feedback that is provided in general through constituency is I'm very, open to that. Keeping in mind that we have what we know is the executive branch and the legislative branch, right? And so the city council introduces the legislation, and the executive, it's the enforcement side as well. But working collaboratively at the end of the day for a unified front, which is for the city of Somerville, is what's extremely important on here. Now, through the mayor's office, we have the intergovernmental affairs, and I believe we have staff members. We see it's Neha, he's here with us. And so, I look forward to having the conversation with Neha as well, and Hannah and our staff, but also with the council members as well. I make myself accessible to anyone who wishes to discuss any matter. I'll be honest with you, I'm not here right now and committing to any ordinances that I have not researched on my own, nor what impact it would actually cause to the residents of Somerville or businesses. But I can tell you that I will definitely be ears in terms of listening and hearing out your perspective in terms of the issue that you are bringing before us, along with the mayor's office with the executive team. But ultimately, if we can make government work efficiently and have a workflow system that provides a 21st century infrastructure as well in terms of IT and a couple of other areas, again, I'm here to definitely have an open mind and see how we can work together.
Follow up, Councilor Burnley?
Yes, well, just a comment, not a follow-up question, but thank you. Through you, I'm very appreciative of that response. Of course, I'm not asking you to commit on the spot to any particular policies or ordinances, well, especially policies that you have not researched or been in conversation about thus far. I will say on the ordinance front, I feel very strongly that that's the council's purview. We pass the ordinances, they become law. We hope very egregiously that they are enforced once they become law. But I'm not here to ask you about that. I will say, just as a final note, that I do hope for your success in this role. I believe that the city should be working as collaboratively as possible, and when we are on our best footing, that it serves the interests of our residents. And that is the ultimate goal and ultimate good of government. So welcome to the city of Somerville, and I hope you find it a welcoming place.
Appreciate it.
I didn't actually have questions, but welcome and congratulations on the role. Just a quick comment. I know that I was one of the folks who was skeptical about this role. We here in the Cambridge-Somerville area have seen city managers come and go in the city of Cambridge, and the policy contentions that can come up between the branches of government and the folks who manage the city. And so I think I will speak for myself. That was one of my concerns with this position initially, was how do we differentiate managing a city, helping the city run smoothly, with becoming a city manager? And so you've got a challenge ahead of you, but your experience sounds fantastic, and I hope that we can support you in this role, but also make sure we hold these lines around the difference between managing the city and becoming city managers. So again, welcome, congratulations, and happy to have you here tonight.
Thank you, Councilmember Kelly.
Thank you, Councilor McLaughlin and Davis.
Thank you, Mr. President. Through you, welcome. I didn't have any questions, but of course, listening to the conversation now, I do have questions. I'd love to just have a conversation with you about everything I want to talk about, but curious, you mentioned that you're a city councilor in another city?
I am.
Okay, well, we've had a lot of conversations about things like this. We might have to give you a raise next budget season, because we know how hard work that is to have a full-time job and also be a city councilor. But a real question, I am curious, because this conversation has come up. CAO, city manager, you've worked in multiple levels of government. Could you explain what a CAO is compared to a city manager, why it's different, maybe why it's similar?
I could. I do know that in some cities, city managers define in totally different language than in another city. I'd say that a city manager is mostly in a city where the council president, by virtue, by charter or ordinance, is actually the acting mayor, while the city manager actually comes in and is more of the operational side. In this case, here in the city of Somerville, we have a mayor, and a mayor that is actually elected. And so I see this role as actually working with the executive team, with the mayor, and making sure that the goals that are outlined, any strategic plans that we have in place and objectives have benchmarks and are being executed timely. And I go back to using the word efficiently, because we want to make sure the city operates in a very efficient way. And so my role coming in is making sure that, I work with the mayor, but as well as, again, with the city council members, and while I'm separating my two roles, I understand, the role of a council person as well, for asking the questions, and they're very well noted. But the CAO and the city manager, I would say, are two distinguished positions.
I'm good, thank you. Looking forward to working with you.
Thank you. Likewise. Thank you, Councilmember.
Councilor Davis, then Scott.
Thank you, Mr. President. Through you to our new CAO. Welcome. Thank you so much for coming here this evening. My questions have been answered, so I'll just essentially the comments that were made by particularly Councilor Kelly and Councilor McLaughlin. I very much echo. I couldn't be more thrilled not only to hear the array of your professional experiences, but that you're also a municipal elected official. And as I'm sure you've to whatever extent you've sort of followed our conversations regarding the charter and anything else, which I've no issue if you haven't fully, because I'm sure you've had a million things to get to focus on in the last whatever time period. There have been discussions about this particular role and the degree to which we build some sort of accountability process in the charter. My hope and expectation is that it's something that it's never will be used in any form, but I couldn't be more excited that the leader who will step forward and define this role is herself a legislative, a member of the legislative body. So I think that'll be, that's serendipitous, I suppose. So welcome. Really look forward to meeting you further and working together. Thank you.
Thank you, Councilmember Davis.
Councilor Scott.
Welcome. It's a pleasure to meet you. As everybody said, I'm going to take you up on your offer to be in touch and to talk about those priorities. Not for nothing, could somebody pass along your email address or phone number so we can know a way to contact you? That'd
Absolutely.
be great. Thanks. And I just had two quick questions while you're here. So when did you actually get to start?
I just started, this is actually my third week, beginning of my third week, yes.
Welcome. And I thought I heard Cranston, Rhode Island there. Are you making the commute up here and working on site every day?
I am.
Whew. Well, God bless. I think it's rough enough just walking up the hill from Ward 2. So thank you for your dedication, and I look forward to getting that message and being in touch soon.
Thank you, sir.
Thank you. Councilor Wilson?
Thank you, Mr. President. Welcome. I'm really encouraged by what I'm hearing tonight. I'm excited to work with you, get to know you, and I'll just say, if you can help make invoicing and payment of invoices in this city work better, I will be extremely impressed. Thanks.
If I can, through the chair, absolutely. That's actually, it's on one of my items noted in terms of my listening tour that has actually been provided to me already. So appreciate that, and thank you so much for your words.
Councilor Gomez-Mocad.
So first, I want to apologize. I had another meeting related to this, and I just want to point out the power of women. They can have 2 jobs and do it well, so welcome aboard. Thank you.
Thank you, Councilmember. Appreciate it. Thank you.
All right. Thank you very much for being here. As we've all said, welcome. We look forward to working with you. And thank you.
Thank you again. Have a very safe night. Thank you.
All right. Next item, please.
The next item that we'll take out of order is item 8.2, an officer's communication from the Director of Communications and Community Engagement, conveying the process for language access requests.
All right. I believe we have a presentation virtually from Director Taylor. Is that right? Miss Gamble.
Good evening. Through the chair, this is Meredith Gamble. I'm not sure if I'm able to share my screen or share the slides. Are the slides viewable virtually or in the chambers?
One moment.
Okay, one moment. Sorry, I have a dual screen situation going on over here. Okay. Show my screen.
We see them now.
Are you able to see the slides?
We see the slides and the thumbnails.
Okay.
And if you wouldn't mind just introducing yourself for the record, please.
Absolutely. All right. I might not be able to. There we go. Okay, here we are. To the chair, my name is Meredith Gamble. I am the Deputy Director and Language Justice Coordinator for the Office of Immigrant Affairs in the City of Somerville. Thank you very much for the time tonight to be with you all to talk about the process through which you will be able to access, to request language access services for the City Council. Shall I dive right in?
Yes, please. We'll let you get through the presentation, and then we'll open it up for questions.
Fantastic. All right, I'd like to start first by situating language access services, by which I mean translation and interpretation services, in the larger ecosystem of language justice. This ecosystem includes a few building blocks which are really important to ensuring that we are providing the highest quality and most effective language access services to our residents. Translation and interpretation services are a really critical piece of that, but also are these other pieces. Civic engagement, so consistent engagement over the long range to bring in constituents into their local government. plain language, ensuring that we are communicating clearly so that our audience understands it the first time they read or hear it. And our audience, of course, is the public. And in the context of language access services, it is multilingual and immigrant audiences. Outreach, ensuring that when we are providing language access services, that they are reaching the communities we intend for them to reach, so that they are useful and benefiting those communities, and that we are building a welcoming environment, so that we are building in those processes, methods of contact, communication, to really bring folks who have been historically excluded from local government into the local government, connecting with them and making them feel that this is also their government to participate in. And then, of course, the language access services, translation, interpretation, that at that point where we can now connect a multilingual audience to our local government, we have the appropriate services to facilitate that communication. All of these elements are really important in ensuring language access, and I bring this up at the top of my presentation because this is going to be the common thread that drives how our process for requesting these services and fulfilling those requests was created. The goal of the process is centered on one vision here, which is to ensure that language access services are accessible, equitable, and effective for the residents and the constituencies that we serve, so that language is not a barrier to participation in local government or access to information, resources, opportunities, and elected officials. Importantly, we're also driven from a place of not doing harm by providing language access services that may be not well thought through or careless even, that could actually cause harm. For example, translations that are inaccurate and convey inaccurate message to the communities that speak those languages, or creating a space where interpretation is not accurate and actually works to alienate and humiliate even the residents who show up to that space expecting to be included. So we're really operating from a place of not doing harm, number one, and making sure that we are advancing access to the city through accessible, equitable, and effective language access services. And this is the goal that drives this process. I'm going to jump into the actual process for how you, City Council of Somerville, will request language access services. There are two terms I do want to clarify. When we talk about language access services, there's two main buckets. We can think about the interpretation services and translation services. Interpretation services is the conversion of oral language into a target oral language. This can be done virtually, it can be done in person, consecutively, or simultaneously using interpretation equipment. Translation services are the conversion of written text into a written target language. So this will be your documents, your flyers, anything that is written. These services require very distinct skill sets and considerations when we're determining how to best provide the services, and that again drives our request process. All right, here is the magic link we've all been waiting for. This is the language access request form. It is the form that we have been working on in the past few months to fine tune and make sure that it is meeting that goal of providing language access services and preparing us to provide the language access services in a way that benefits residents of Somerville. And this is the link that you will have access to and be able to use to request translation and interpretation services. It's pretty self-explanatory, but real quickly, I'll just go through some of the major steps here. So you'll fill out your contact information. There's a drop-down menu for your department. City Council is a department in that list, so that's the selection that you'll make. You'll then select your language, the languages that you're requesting, and the request type, and provide a project title. When you select the request type, there are a few different options for both interpretation and translation services. And they will bring you, depending on what you select, it will bring you to another screen. So for translation requests, you will then be prompted to provide a deadline for the final document. We do request at least 2 weeks notice. And this is for a few reasons. One, we want to make sure that we have time to take a look at the document, fine tune it and prep it for the translator. There are multiple different considerations when we're doing that to make sure that we're working with a document that's plain language, that is free from jargon or acronyms, or even local kind of like Somerville terms that might not be all that familiar to folks who are living outside and translating outside of the context of Somerville. So providing that context to the translator allows us to make sure the translation is as locally relevant and culturally appropriate as possible. That's an effective language access service, so that takes a bit of time, and that gives time for the translator to then complete that request, send it back, and we can deliver it to the requester. You'll upload for a translation request, we'll need an editable document, so Word files, Google Docs, Candle links that are shared, open sharing links are acceptable. Right now, we're not able to work with uneditable documents. And then you will submit your request. For interpretation requests, again, you'll provide a deadline. We do ask for at least 2 weeks notice. An interpretation request, that time is used to, one, ensure that we have enough time to secure an interpreter. This is a finite resource in a very language-rich region, so we'll want to make sure we're able to secure an interpreter and able to work with them and prepare them for whatever the assignment is, which may require them to, review and become really familiar with a PowerPoint presentation for a community event, let's say. And all of that takes time to make sure we're providing really effective and quality services. You'll provide a quick description of the event type, indicate whether or not you have a multilingual outreach plan. Just sticking a flag in that, you'll definitely want to think about having an outreach plan and have one in place before you're thinking about interpretation for an event, so that we're providing interpretation and also letting the community know that there will be interpretation and they're invited. And from there, submit that request. Zooming back out a little bit, this is a bird's eye view of the full process from start to finish. So language access, before even submitting a language access request, some things that you might consider when you're thinking about what type of services you may need and what might be the best approach are thinking about who is your audience, who are you trying to bring into the conversation? What is that, the language needs of that? What are the language needs of that audience? How does that audience prefer to receive communication? And informed from that, how then should the information be distributed? These are all helpful questions to think about. Are we creating a brochure? Are we creating a social media kind of document in terms of a translation type request? And then thinking about your timeline. Is there enough time to integrate language access services in a meaningful way into your project? And if you're not able to there's not enough time to really integrate everything into your project, is there a way we can kind of build up some sort of access or plan for another project? From there, you can submit the language access request through that link in the form I just went through, providing 2 weeks notice. When you hit submit on that form, that will come directly to the Office of Immigrant Affairs, and we process the request. I'll go into a little bit what processing means and kind of the mechanics of that and what sorts of things we're considering and looking through. But essentially, if we get a request and there's the request is good to go, we'll go ahead and coordinate with the vendors that provide the translation and interpretation services. We will provide them with the materials that they need to deliver on that service. one thing that we do for all interpretation events is we create an interpretation plan that really spells out exactly the role of the interpreter and the whole run of show for the meeting and how language access is integrated into that. And that is a plan that's shared, that our office would share with the interpreter as well as with the requester, so that everyone's on the same page about, you know, what does it mean when we are putting language access into a space, and how do we make sure that we're creating that space in an appropriate way for interpretation. And then we would also coordinate with the translators on translations, and once those are completed, deliver them in their final form to the requester. Now, I don't know if you can, it's a bit cut off on the bottom there, but I can explain it. Once we connect you with the interpreter or deliver the translated materials, then you are ready to implement. So share those translated materials or host your event. One additional step that I would add here that's actually not on this slide is after the event, I am really curious and open and would really appreciate any feedback that you would have on the quality of the services provided, how it went, if maybe there were some things in the interpretation plan that could use some tweaking or that I might want to think about, so we can prepare differently next time in a way that is going to benefit residents, multilingual residents, and immigrant residents in Somerville. And also on the quality of the translations or the interpretation provided, that's really helpful to me to be thinking about how we're going to build a really strong language access plan in the city. I'll dive in now to a little bit, again, just jumping back to that that process part. Like when we receive the request and we're reviewing it and kind of figuring out what to do with it, what that looks like. There's a few things that we think about, and these are really grounded again in those building blocks of language justice that I mentioned at the start, and the goal that we have of really doing everything we can to provide the best language access services for the residents of Somerville, so that we are driving home the message and really that this is a local government for them, that we're going to include them, that they are entitled to these services and to be a part of the full breadth of civic life in our community. An example of a request that would be ready to go right off the bat without really any additional questions. For a translation request, that would look like, okay, it's written in plain language. I'm reading it. I have no prior context of this topic, but I can understand everything that's being communicated here. And to be clear, plain language is not about like my expertise in the topic or my level of education or how big my vocabulary it is. Plain language is about, again, is this understandable and legible the first time you read it or hear it? Plain language, all it means is that it's clear language. It's effective language. A translation request that has a clear rationale for the languages requested. It reflects the audience that we're trying to engage. That's a check mark. There's sufficient time to translate and share the materials before the event or a deadline. And there's instructions for how to request interpretation. For example, on a flyer that's advertising an event, say it's a Spanish flyer advertising an event, we're inviting the Spanish-speaking community to it. We should be informing them how they can request interpretation. So if they actually come to the event we're inviting them to, that they can fully access that event as well and participate. An interpretation request would, there would be an outreach plan underway or a confirmed need. By confirmed need, I mean there's a specific resident or situation where we know that there is an actual need to have an interpreter present in order to connect with an elected official. The event or topic or content reflects the audience. It's written in that plain language. The slides and the approach are created with that audience in mind. The content is ready to share with interpreters before the event because the interpreters have to be just as familiar with the content as the presenters in order to do an effective job interpreting. and the event structure allows for interpretation services to be possible. We also may receive some requests that we might take a look at and say, okay, maybe we just need to make a few tweaks to make this work in the best way possible. Given, assuming there's a bit of time to work with the 2 weeks, notice, there typically is enough time to kind of make some tweaks and make it happen. Some things might be on a translation request, making sure there's no jargon or some acronyms. If they are, then we might need to adjust the language a bit to make it appropriate for translation. Again, that's for the audience that's receiving that translation as well as for the translator, because the translator is going to have a really tough time translating a document if it's not clear what the message is in English. If the translation is missing instructions for how to request interpretation for an event, let's say, then we might get back to you and say, okay, hey, we noticed that this is missing. Can you add that into your document? And then we can get this done. Interpretation requests, let's say the event structure doesn't allow for interpretation services. I'll give an example. On Zoom, when you have breakout rooms, you can't really have interpretation, simultaneous interpretation, because the interpreters don't follow you into your breakout rooms. So that might be a consideration. Like, I see you want to do these two things. They don't really work together. So what would you want to do? Can we adjust the structure of this event to accommodate the interpretation? And then we can go from there. I want to be clear that sometimes there are requests that we might need to table or think about reworking for a project in the future, because this really runs the risk of, potentially doing harm if we actually provide the services in a way that's not thoughtful or well thought through, and there's not enough time to really prepare appropriately. We don't want to risk alienating folks and misinterpreting or mistranslating something that could cause more confusion or mistrust from residents of local government. Something like this would be like a translation request that is really complex and unclear, and there's no time to revise it. And there's a lot of languages requested, but there's not really a clear direction or rationale or reasoning why those languages might be needed. Insufficient time to translate and share information, and there's not an outreach plan to share translated materials. There's might be a day we get materials translated for an event that's happening the next day, and there's not enough time to actually share those materials with the community, then we haven't really met our goal of actually providing meaningful language access services that's going to benefit the community. For interpretation requests, this might look like advertising materials that weren't translated to invite community members to an event topic that has not been created with the audience in mind. It is really more for a more targeted, specific audience. A request that's made without enough time to request and prepare interpreters, or in the event, like the example I just gave a moment ago, an event is on Zoom, but we've decided not to get rid of breakout rooms, so we're gonna have to get rid of interpretation capability then. What happens once we sort of make a determination about whether this is a request that can be processed right away, or we need to workshop it, or maybe we need to plan for next time? A green light request we'll process it right away. It's pretty straightforward. Workshopping, we'll get back to the requester and make some recommendations, and we can provide, some justification, like why those recommendations are needed, like how they connect to our goal of providing accessible and equitable and effective language access services. And for projects that might not be able to adjust or workshop in the time frame we're working on, we'll advise on how we could plan to do that differently, or prepare for the next time there's a project similar or an event similar, so that we can really integrate language access into your project, whatever that may be, and provide that meaningful access. One thing I do want to be really clear about too, we're talking about not fulfilling requests. The big caveat to this is when there's a known specific language access need. So there is a resident who we know speaks a certain language and wants to connect with a city councilor or attend a city council meeting, and we know that there's that language need. We'll do everything we can to get that through as soon as possible. And we know sometimes, often we're not going to get 2 weeks notice from a resident when they want to connect. We'll do everything we can to make that happen. But these guidelines are really about when we're trying to plan for and include the community. When we know that there is a need or a specific request from a resident to gain a language access services, we'll do what we can to provide them, regardless of the time frame that we're given. Although, because there are challenges to providing language access services within a very short time frame for the reasons that I discussed, it's not always possible. So the more time we get, the better. But we will do what we can when an actual confirmed needs arises. And that's the overview that I have for you all today. I'm happy to answer any questions or clarify anything from the council. Thank you very much.
Thank you, Deputy Director Gamble. I see Councilor Gomez-Moacad.
Thank you for putting this together, Deputy Director Gamble. I have a couple of questions related to this. As we move forward with having translation, interpretation in meetings, I'm wondering if we're going to revise the way we post interpretation available, because a lot of times it's in English. In our websites, some departments too as well. You can't find a translation button, like for the rec, for example. I've been fighting, it's at the very bottom. So I'm hoping that we are working that simultaneously as well. I don't know. The next item I want to make clear is that it's not only about breakout rooms, but right now I know I sound like a broken record. If the clerk wants to throw a shoe at me, she's allowed. But I think in order to have interpretation, we can't do it in our current format. I even forgot what to call it all of a sudden. You need Zoom, and I'm assuming we will have some guidelines for counselors if they're hosting a meeting. Let's say Councilor McLaughlin has a development. He tends to have a larger speaking community than some of us in our wards do. So you need, I know from having done this before, you need to add the interpreter piece in Zoom. Like there should be some sort of slide orienting our counselors on that. The other piece I want to make sure is that some guideline too, when you're having interpretation, I've learned this because I speak very quickly and I get in trouble all the time, is you need to, some training on speaking more slowly, taking pauses. Also, if you have a technical meeting, let's say, I'm picking on you, Councilor McLaughlin, today. Let's say Councilor McLaughlin has a heavily contaminated site. He has the environmental engineer who talks terms, an AUL, activity use limitation, or a ramp plan, release abatement measure, that kind of thing is who is going back to the technical team and saying, you need to, some guidelines that way you can hand to that person so they can do that effectively. Again, I'm saying this from my own experience. The other part is you asked for a 2-week notice, but obviously we want to post this interpretation available ahead of time, and it's a public hearing. I need to think about the timelines when we do that, because I think it's beyond 2 weeks. I can't think of it right now. But Clerk, do you want to comment on that?
I can answer that, yes, through the president. It depends on the nature of the public hearing, but since the notices are only published on Wednesdays, it often equates to about a week and a half.
Okay, so I just want to make sure we think of that in timelines. Another feedback to do is also always think, I'm going to pick on Councilor McLaughlin again because he has a higher speaking population. Do we think do we prepare ahead for meetings by demographics? Like, if we know a word is much, and it, let's say the subject is, we're going to tear down a church on Ward 1. And it's a very controversial issue, and a lot of people of the community want to talk about it. And we know we have I know Boston is doing this as part of their language plan. They try to have interpretation available ahead based on demographics or topic or whatever. And then one last question I have in this interpretation, translation, and really not related to this, because I had recently an incident with a Portuguese speaker resident, where with my Spanish and our Portuguese, we try to communicate, and it was not perfect. At what moment, if you're having an issue with a resident, a communication, can we reach out to you to schedule a meeting for interpretation? Like, because I think I would love our counselors, our residents, to feel free to call our counselors, and in order to support that, we should consider adopting some sort of the same system the schools have right now, for where you can get texted and it then automatically translates to you. So I'm going to throw those things out, because I know I have the facility. I'm lucky I speak 2 languages, but not all our counselors, and that shouldn't be the reason why some counselors don't get accessed. And that's it. Thank you.
Thank you, Counselor. Deputy Gamble, did you want to respond to any of that?
Yes, thank you. Through the president, thank you very much, Councillor Gomez-Macao. I agree a lot. I'm nodding along with a lot of your comments. They're all things that I'm thinking about and will be part of the language access plan as we're building it out, and I hope to speak with this council about soon as well. And I thank you for pointing out the situation you recently had with the Portuguese-speaking resident. That will help me think a little bit about what sort of more like in the moment on demand services might be appropriate and helpful in that sort of situation. But to answer your question, in a situation where, yes, where you would want to sit down and have a conversation with that resident and have clear and accurate interpretation, then that is something that you could certainly submit through the form, and we take a look at. And you can reach out to me if, even before you submit the form, if you have, some questions about whether or not to, it would be the good approach, the best approach, and we can see what we can do about that. So thank you very much for those comments.
And Councillor Kelly, then Councillor McLaughlin.
Thank you so much, Mr. President. Through you to the deputy, thanks so much for this presentation. It was super helpful. I know for me, I've spent years compiling a spreadsheet of interpreters in the greater Boston, Massachusetts area so that I can call people up when I have events and I can find somebody. And that spreadsheet grows by the year, so I know how challenging it is to find folks who can do this work. So I had a couple quick questions about the tension between normalizing that there's going to be interpretation at events while recognizing that there's a real constraint and limitation on resources. So one of the things that you mentioned was, in the yellow flag or red flag area, that if there aren't going to be folks who are going to take advantage of interpretation, then that may fall into a category where we don't provide interpretation. And, in my experience, it stinks when you have an interpreter show up and they're expected to do something and then nobody shows up who needs them, but also that kind of repetition and normalizing that there's going to be interpretation support often then does create the space for people to feel like they can show up even if the first 1 or 2 times folks didn't attend. So how are you planning to deal with that tension? Because I think it will be a tension at the beginning of some of our, particularly I'm thinking for the council meetings, where there may be a request and nobody shows up, but we do it a couple times and then people are like, this is going to be here, so I should attend. So how is your office planning to navigate those kinds of requests?
Through the president, thank you, Councillor Kelly, for the question. Yeah, it's a great question, and the way that and there is this sort of delicate balance and tension. The way that I like to think about it is, again, going back to that, like, language justice ecosystem where the translation and interpretation services are one piece of this larger puzzle. The goal is not necessarily that every time we have an interpreter present that that a whole community shows up requiring those services. Meaning that if we provide an interpreter for an event and nobody shows up requiring that service, it's not necessarily a failure. It means no one showed up, because we also know there are a lot of other circumstances and constraints that make it challenging for the communities we're trying to bring in to attend these types of meetings and to engage with local government. Part of our work is really thinking critically about those other building blocks that go along with the translation and interpretation requests in that language justice ecosystem, that when all of those things are lining up and we're really focusing our energies on those pieces, so the civic engagement, the intentional multilingual outreach strategies, the creating a welcoming environment, if we keep working on that, and the plain language piece is huge as well. People know what sort of event they're actually being invited to show up to. If we can focus our energies there, and if we are doing really intentional work in those areas, then that's how we sort of slowly build, I think, what you're trying to get at, or as I understood, that normalizing that interpretation, and this is happens in this space, this is a multilingual space, and we just keep working until people do start showing up. Yes, so one of the ways to balance this tension is to think about, is there good reason to believe that someone may show up to this event requiring language access services? And that may show up comes from, have we done the work on these other building blocks that make it likely that someone is going to show up, that the community that speaks this language knows this event is happening, that we've shared it, the information with our community partners to let them know that this is happening and that we really do want people to show up. And that's how we start sort of to build that infrastructure and that habit of creating the, what's the word I'm looking for? Like the expectation and the building knowledge around local government being a space where multilingual things happen and where people, regardless of the language they speak, are welcome to come and communicate and participate in the language they're most comfortable communicating and listening in. Yes, that's how I'll respond to that question. Thank you.
No, that's super helpful. And even just the question within your statement, I wrote down, are there good reasons to believe that someone will show up? I think that's a very helpful framework, at least for me to think through. This is less of a question for you and more of a question to one of my colleagues, the chair of finance. I know that we are still working on the schedule, but we do, I think, have the public hearing dates set out. It could be a good test run. We do have the 2-week period at this point. You probably are already starting to draft with the notices in your mind, but that feels like a kind of perfect test case for a council meeting of this, answering this question, is there a good reason why you believe people would be at that meeting and who might need interpretation? So, I'm really interested in seeing how this goes. I think it's going to be us practicing and growing and getting better at this as we go. Obviously, there's kind of 3 different types of meetings that the council is always going to have. We're going to have our community meetings for the ward councilors, the committee meetings, and then these kind of public hearings, which all feel like 3 different unique but repetition types of meetings where interpretation would be necessary. So I don't have any further questions, but thank you for being gentle with us as we try to struggle and make sure that we can make this space as accessible to folks as possible. And thanks for the work you're doing.
Thank you. Councilor McLaughlin.
Thank you, Mr. President. As Councilor Gomez-Macard stated, I got a lot of problems, and I could use them. I could use as many translations of those problems as possible. So I do have a comment, though, that I do appreciate this because I just remember when I first got into office, the Summer Viva program was just created, and it was 3 part-time employees. And I said then that it's like, if you give them more assets, they will find more work. And I successfully advocated to make those full-time employees, and since then the program has really expanded, and this sounds like the visualization of the potential of what Somerville can do, because I know we've all asked, it's great that the city has these resources for translation, but we all need this as well. So I'm going to be calling Director Gamble a lot. So thank you very much for coming, because I could definitely use your support.
Thank you. Councillor Scott.
Thank you. I don't have any questions because it was a great presentation, and actually because my colleagues already asked the questions that I had on my mind. I just want to thank you, Deputy Director Gamble. I'm sure you recall my fervent questioning on the topic of getting these services provided for the City Council. So much like Councilor McLaughlin, I'm very excited for this. I know there's still a ways to go and some great ideas to follow up on, and I thank the colleague from Ward 5 for those. But I couldn't be happier that this is a reality, and I've already got the form bookmarked. Thank you.
All right. Thank you, colleagues, and thank you very much. Oh, Councilor Burnley.
Through the chair, can you hear me?
We hear you.
Thank you. Just really briefly, I just want to convey my gratitude as well to our presenter for this presentation. I don't think I'm overstepping my colleagues by saying I feel like your passion about this topic was conveyed very well. Your expertise is as well, of course. And I think, it really puts into perspective for me how accessibility, and by that I mean accessibility of all kinds, including in government, is so incredibly important and tantamount to justice, and how important it is for government not only to strive to be a model for that in our society, but to reduce barriers for that. And I think that process I will be, very much trying to be a participant in, having conversations with you about, and trying to further, will help us in a long and big way to bring our community together in a much more inclusive way. And so just passing along my gratitude, and have a nice day.
Great. Thank you so much
Counselor.
for all the comments, councilors. I appreciate it.
Thank you, Deputy Gamble. I think there have been a lot of people around this horseshoe in our community and the administration who have worked to advocate for this, and I'm thrilled to hear this, and I think it's also really appreciated to hear the kind of expectation setting around a multilingual outreach plan, what is expected in these materials. I think it's really important that you're doing that up front so that we all know what, all know what to expect. Thank you very much. We look forward to taking advantage of these services.
Thank you.
Next item, please.
The next item that we'll take out of order is item 7.9, a mayor's requesting to appear with consultant Donald Jacobs to provide information regarding the classification and compensation study.
All right. Ms. Singh.
Chair, if I may, I apologize. The consultant, Donald Jacob, who was to provide this update, is unable to join due to an unexpected situation that came up, so I apologize, but I would request that this item be taken up at the next City Council meeting.
Very well. We'll lay this item on the table. Thank you. Next item, please.
And that will return us to the regular order of business. And item 4.1, an order by Councilors Strezzo and McLaughlin that the Director of Engineering paint a crosswalk at Washington and Franklin Streets.
Councilor Wilson would like to sign on. Councilor Strezzo.
Thank you. This came forward, this request came forward from a pastor at a church on Washington Street, very concerned because there are a lot of children and seniors that cross over this particular block frequently, and all I am asking is just a coat of paint to just allow people to walk, and just that signal, and can we send this to committee?
Certainly. We will refer this item to traffic and parking.
Thank you.
Item 4.2 is an order by Councilor Strezzo that the Commissioner of Public Works remove or raise above human height the dangling wire tied to a street sign in front of 88 Foskett Street and report to the City Council who owns the pole.
Councilor Strezzo?
Back at it again. Can I please take 4.2 and 4.9 collectively and stick them in committee?
Certainly.
Thank you. Waive the readings
we'll
is
waive the
fine.
reading
Thank you.
of these and refer them to Public Works and Public Utilities. Thank you, Councilor. Councilor, just to clarify, that was 4.2 through 4.9?
4.9, correct.
Okay. Thank you.
Item 4.10 is a resolution by Councilor Strezzo that the administration provide an update on plans for the Universal Basic Income, Guaranteed Income implementation and rollout.
Councilor Strezzo?
Thank you. I'm so excited about this. Can we discuss this in committee?
Certainly. I'll refer this to Housing and Community Development.
Thank you.
Item 4.11 is an order by Councilor Kelly that the Director of Inspectional Services and the Environmental Health Coordinator update this council on spring rodent mitigation programs and smart box phases.
Councilor Kelly?
Thank you, President. It is the spring, which means that it's rodent breeding season. I have yet to be touched by a rat this spring, but I was almost touched by one yesterday. So we have a rodent issues meeting coming up in like a week or so, and we'll be talking about the spring phase of the rodent mitigation. I think all of us probably got a postcard about it, that kind of educational material, how that went over, and how the most recent phase of the smart boxes is going and where we're going from here. I know at our last rodent issue meeting, we discovered a bit of a blunder in what we consider East Somerville, and hopefully we'll be getting updates on real smart boxes being put in actual East Somerville. So if you could send this item to rodent issues, that'd be fantastic.
So we're rebranding spring as rat breeding season.
You got it. You know, April's flowers, rain, rats.
Councilor Wilson would like to sign on, and this item is and Councilor Strezzo, and this item is referred to the Committee on Rodent Affairs.
Item 4.12 is a resolution by Councilor Kelly that the administration update this council on the progress and timeline for establishing a safe consumption site.
Councilor Kelly.
Thank you, Mr. President. I know for the Finance Committee, we've been seeing a lot of movement with money going back and forth between stabilization funds, with design contracts being paid out, with invoices, all having to do with the safe consumption site. And I don't know who said it first, but follow the money. So the money is saying that things are moving on the safe consumption site, but we have yet to have an update on the safe consumption site. So we'll be talking about this in the Public Health and Public Safety Committee meeting on Monday night at 7 o'clock. Feel free to join us, hoping to get an update on the progress as we enter budget season, the summertime, but more importantly, where we're at with the safe consumption site timeline. So if you can send this to Public Health and Public Safety, that'd be greatly appreciated.
Councilor Wilson and Davis would like to sign on, and that item is referred to Public Health and Councilor McLaughlin.
Item 4.13 is a zoning ordinance by Councilors Ewan-Campen and Wilson, amending the zoning ordinances Section 10.3, Development Standards, and Table 10.4.1 to include vegetated roofs.
Councilor Ewan-Campen.
Thank you, Madam President. Councilor Wilson and I were approached by a group of constituents who brought it to our attention that there are other communities in Massachusetts that have found a way that on new construction above a certain size, basically what we would call MR3 and above, to effectively require green roofs on those buildings. It is not any additional cost. It is a huge benefit for the local pollinators, for local stormwater retention, for cooling. There are myriad benefits to these. And so we've been working with these community groups as well as with our planning department and with our legal staff. This is one of these items where the actual text of the amendment, which was drafted by Dan Bartman, is deceptively short, but actually a lot of, it does a lot and it covers a lot of content. So I very much look forward to discussing this in land use. I think there's quite a bit to discuss around it, and I really look forward to hearing from the public on it and moving on this, and I want to thank Councilor Wilson for his partnership on it.
Anyone else? Councilor Wilson.
Thank you, President. my name is on this, but credit really has to go to Councilor Ewan Campen, who really did a lot of the heavy lifting here. I'm just really appreciative of his work on this, as well as the subject matter experts and community members and our law department for their engagement on this. I'm really hopeful we end up with something good here to show for all this work. Thanks.
Thank you.
And I'd ask that this please be referred to the Land Use Committee and Planning Board.
Please refer this to Land Use Committee and Planning Board. Thank you.
The next item is item 4.14, a communication from Councilor Ewan Campen in his capacity as president, appointing Alessandra Sider to the Municipal Compensation Advisory Board.
Excellent. This and the next two items are appointments from the City Council to our Municipal Compensation Advisory Board and the pilot, the Payment in Lieu of Taxes Advisory Board. And I really want to thank colleagues who nominated members of the community, and especially to these members of the community for stepping up to serve in these capacities. And we can waive the readings of 415 and 416, please.
That brings us to item 6A, a report of the Special Committee on Charter Review, meeting as a committee of the whole on May 10th, 2023.
Councilor Scott.
Thank you, Mr. President. The committee met for an unusually long 3 hours and 24 minutes or so. However, it was certainly in pursuit of a laudable goal, which is the conclusion of the substantive policy questions that have come from our review of the 123-page, I believe, report of the Charter Commission that was delivered, or Charter Committee that was delivered to us just a few short months ago. It also marked almost exactly 6 months since our first meeting on the topic, and as I said at the conclusion of the meeting, I could not be more grateful to my colleagues and to all the members of the public and administration who helped us get through this process. I am very much looking forward to the result of that being our next meeting, where we review the scrivener's edits and final text that we will be submitting to the mayor and, of course, to city staff and law department for review. As we then move from this, which is step 2, into step 3, which is allowing the administration, the mayor's office, and all those staff to put in their 2 cents and come back with whether it's compromises or recommendations that we can then take up and hopefully move this process to a conclusion, which sends a home rule petition to the State House well before the end of this calendar year. So the topics covered are well captured in the minutes. There was also the second public hearing that we've had on that process was held. That public hearing was virtual. However, the public hearing was held open. Our next meeting of this committee will be on May 24th, and it will be live and in person here in council chambers. So I know I've already been contacted by several people who are eager to show up and provide their public comment here in person. So for anybody in the public who is watching, that public hearing remains open, of course, for written comment in the intervening time, but our next meeting will open with the conclusion of spoken public comment for anybody who wants to come to the council chambers. Yeah, with that, I would request that the report be accepted as submitted, Mr. Chair.
Thank you very much. And Mr. Chair, you know, just as you said, we're not done, but at this point, I do really, really want to thank you for all the work that you put into chairing that committee. It was an incredible amount of work. You know, for folks in the public who don't know this, my understanding is you made all those slides. You did a lot of work behind the scenes to just make that process possible. So thank you for that. Councilor Davis.
Thank you, Mr. President. Certainly echo that gratitude. There is a late item that relates to this that I'd like to take up now, just to be referred to committee if I could.
Madam Clerk.
Thank you. Yes, we have a resolution from Councilor Davis that language be added to the appropriate section of the Charter Review Committee's proposed charter text to include a provision subjecting the city solicitor to reappointment and reconfirmation every 2 years.
Councilor Davis.
Thank you, Mr. President. Not certainly up to you, but not looking for any discussion on this. The only reason I submitted it tonight was so that folks would know that it was there, rather than bringing it up at the next committee meeting to have a little time to think about it. It was raised last night in our meeting when we were talking about the chief administrative officer, that the city solicitor might be another role, and at the time I sort of thought briefly and said, no, let's just do this one. And as I thought about it more, I thought, well, the city solicitor ostensibly does work directly for us in their role in a way, and so maybe that is appropriate, maybe not, but I wanted to at least have a discussion about that role specifically, since we were talking about more about CAO last night, and then wherever the will of the committee is to include it or not. But if that could be referred to the Charter Review Committee for discussion, I'd appreciate it.
Very well. Thank you very much, Councillor Davis. That item is referred to the Charter Review Committee.
And the next item is item 6B, a report of the Committee on Finance, meeting on May 9th, 2023.
Councillor Wilson.
Thank you, Mr. President. The Finance Committee met on Tuesday night with 5 members present. We covered a 9-item agenda over a fruitful 64 minutes. We unanimously recommended that you approve tonight roughly $26,000 appropriation from the Medical Marijuana Stabilization Fund for the Supervised Consumption Plan, a transfer of $60,000 from fire department salaries to fire alarm overtime due to overtime resulting from positions unexpectedly remaining open beyond January when they had been expected to have been filled. A transfer of approximately $27,000 from OSPCD housing salaries to OSPCD administration salaries to correct a funding discrepancy with a full-time position that is currently vacant, with duties currently being performed by a retired public employee with limited hours. A time-only extension for PMA consultants for owner's project manager services on the building master plan. And finally, a $65,000 state grant to the police department for their traffic safety program. We all remember the discussion we had last winter on last year's grant award and the traffic stop quota that ultimately led us to not approve that request. I'm happy to report that thanks to the work of this council in flagging that concern and Chief Femino's advocacy with the state, that requirement was dropped from this year's grant application. The committee also expressed delight about the inclusion of 3 radar feedback devices in this year's grant. We asked some questions about the overtime cost and logistics of the educational campaign, specifically about how the 25% of the budget roughly dedicated to bike and pedestrian enforcement would be spent. Deputy Chief Ward confirmed that since jaywalking, as it's called, is no longer a violation in our city, there's not any plan for pedestrian enforcement from that, for anyone wondering out there. In the end, the item was recommended for approval by a 5-0 vote, with all 5 votes coming from councilors who had voted against accepting this grant last year with the traffic stop quotas. By a 3-2 vote, we recommended that you approve tonight a request to fund a grants and procurement analyst position in OSPCD. Colleagues raised similar concerns that we'd all raised at the previous Finance Committee meeting on April 25th about creating a new position so close to budget season. Director Ignacio explained that this was a new position that was going to be included in the forthcoming FY 2024 budget, but after learning of an impending FMLA leave by a staff member, there was an urgency to get started filling that position ASAP to ensure that vital work with community nonprofit partners continues during their upcoming busy period. Finally, I'll just note that Director Carroll of Health and Human Services asked that item 230661 be withdrawn in order to introduce a new item with more accurate verbiage, and that is on tonight's agenda. So I ask that you accept this committee report as submitted.
Comments on the committee report? I will just add, so I'm serving on the committee temporarily, so I hadn't been following this closely. It was really impressive news to me when we heard from Deputy Chief Ward that in response to the concerns raised by this city council around the traffic quotas, the traffic stop quotas, it wasn't just that it was dropped from Somerville's application. My understanding is that the entire grant, that requirement was changed across the entire state. So I was really impressed that had happened, and I want to thank the councilors who led the charge on that. Seeing no further discussion, that item is approved. Roll call that.
On the Finance Committee report of May 9th, 2023, Councilor McLaughlin.
Yes.
Councilor Davis.
Yes.
Councilor Scott.
Yes.
Councilor Strezzo.
Yes.
Councilor Klingon. Counselor Wilson.
Yes.
Counselor Burnley.
Aye. Aye. Aye.
Counselor Gomez-Mocad.
Yes.
Counselor Kelly.
Yes.
Counselor Pineda-Newfeld. Counselor Ewan-Campen.
Yes.
With 9 counselors in favor, none opposed, and 2 absent, that committee report is approved. And that puts one item before the committee, before the council for a roll call vote. That item is item 23-0673, the appropriation of $26,279.51 from the Medical Marijuana Stabilization Fund for the Supervised Consumption Plan. On that item, Counselor McLaughlin.
Yes.
Counselor Davis.
Yes.
Counselor Scott.
Yes.
Counselor Strezzo.
Yes.
Counselor Klingon. Counselor Wilson.
Yes.
Counselor Burnley.
Aye.
Counselor Gomez-Mocad.
Yes.
Counselor Kelly.
Yes.
Counselor Pineda-Newfeld. Counselor Ewan-Campen.
Yes.
With 9 counselors in favor, none opposed, and 2 absent, that item is approved.
Excellent.
And the next item before the council is item 6C, a report of the Committee on Land Use, meeting on May 4th, 2023.
Councilor McLaughlin.
Thank you, Mr. President. The Committee of Land Use met and discussed just one item that day, which is an item that several of us signed on to, that the Director of Economic Development discussed with this council on the implementation of the Union Square Covenant, which includes local hiring and veterans hiring. All councilors were in attendance, as well as city staff and Greg Karcheski from US2 and Jen Mencia from OSPCD. So we discussed this, and as was noted, this came up as a conversation when labor unions were talking about the lack of what would you call it, job fairs and hiring preferences in the city of Somerville as opposed to having to go to a place like Rhode Island. So we were presented with a lot of data, which sounds very positive. And what we were told is that city staff is provided with quarterly updates on the numbers of local hiring and veterans hiring. As of January 2023, 622,000 work hours were expended, with 232,000 of that number being performed by people of color, 42,000 hours by Somerville residents, and 26,000 hours by women. Contractors have been employed with veterans, and there are 20 veterans on the job. US2 is sustaining efforts with partners and conducts monthly virtual meetings with them. US2 is performing outreach efforts with trade unions, participants, and hosting job fairs in 2021. A lot of good stuff happening, and I think that this is because of the advocacy of people on this council, as well as the labor unions and community organizers who insisted on this being a part of the covenant, which I should add is a non-binding agreement. It's a good faith agreement for us to get local hiring preferences. So that was the only item we discussed, and it was marked work approved. Everything else was left in committee, and on May 18th, we're going to have a really big meeting with several public hearings and zoning policies discussed. So I submit this committee report for approval.
Councilor Gomez-Mocad on the committee report.
I just want to make a quick note that yesterday at the all-Spanish community meeting, a resident said one of the things, what you would really like was employment opportunities here in Somerville. So I think this is a very timely discussion. Thank you.
Thank you. Seeing no discussion, that committee report is approved. Oh, Councilor Burnley, did you want to speak on that?
The next item is 6D, a report of the Committee on Open Space, Environment, and Energy, meeting on May 8th, 2023.
Councilor Burnley.
If I may, Chair, can you hear me? You cannot hear me. Can you hear me?
We hear you. We hear you.
Okay, great. Thank you. Through you, let me get it right. Open Space, Environment, and Energy met for our May meeting, and we had a very robust and lively meeting where we just had community advocates speak to us about, I believe, one of the council president's favorite plant invasive species, the invasive species, including the black swallowwort, which is everywhere in the city. We had a great discussion where councilors brainstormed along with community advocates about how we can kind of bridge government and community activism to have potentially award-based competitions where community captains could help train and teach people how to identify and pick out these invasive species, remove them, and plant native species in their place. We also got a brief update about community composting for the city. The administration has been conducting a report or survey, a plan, creating a plan, black swallow word, yes, thank you, where they are looking into the viability of the community composting. And that report is coming out fairly soon. And it has been told to us that composting is a top priority in that report, and that implementation should hopefully be beginning soon after the report is released. We also discussed the bottlenecks in terms of solar panel installation, which it turns out is mostly on the contractor side. From the city side, it takes us, I believe, about 7 days to get out our folks to different roofs and survey the sites, while contractors are a bit more disparate in their results. We also spoke about something that I had a great fervor for, which was our community gardens and the potential for a mutual aid garden. We talked about the difficulties in creating space for that based on our soil capacity and status. However, we did get some slight good news in that our wait list for community gardens is not as long as we had previously thought, because they are filled with duplicate names, names from the same household, as well as people who have moved. And thus, although the wait is quite substantial, the commission that is looking into how to revise and reform that process is very much engaged with how they can speed up that timeline. And we're all excited to get more fruits and vegetables and flowers in our community. So that was our meeting. Took a number of hours, but was quite robust and happy. And with that, I'd like to submit this report for approval.
Thank you, Councilor Burnley. Seeing no discussion, that committee report is accepted.
And the next item is item 6E, a report of the Committee on Public Utilities and Public Works, meeting on May 8th, 2023.
We're going to accept the committee report as submitted.
I said there wasn't much of that.
Councilor Kelly, do you want
Happy to
give
share.
it?
Yeah,
Okay.
sure. As the backup of the backup, we had a fabulously brief meeting. Actually, it was not that brief. It was 90 minutes. Brief is like 30 or less. We took up a handful of items, some items which we have to revisit related to, I think, telephone polls, waiting more detailed response from DPW. But then the bulk of the meeting was Councilor Klingen's real project that he's been bringing forward to the Public Utility Public Works Committee regarding municipal broadband. We had a presentation from the folks at Upgrade Cambridge, I think is the name, who were speaking about the municipal broadband program that they're working on in Cambridge. Super insightful. I think the most interesting thing that I took away from the meeting is the dollar figure of municipal broadband in the city of Cambridge, which is south of 200 million with a 30% contingency, which really is quite affordable. I think many folks, when we think about municipal broadband, are like, are we inching near $1 billion investment in this type of public utility? And the answer is no. The city of Cambridge, with nearly 40,000 more residents than us and a larger population, a larger physical geographical area, is getting it potentially for less than $200 million. So really fascinating conversation. I think Councilor Klingon is going to continue to bring municipal broadband topics before the committee in an effort to continue to build public awareness, but ultimately try to build some real buy-in about, is this a program we could pursue? Is there a more limited, maybe pocket-based municipal broadband program we can pursue? Or do we follow in the footsteps of Cambridge? So the committee report's already been accepted, but that was my editorializing.
Thank you, Councilor Kelly. That is much appreciated, and I think that's an incredibly important discussion that all of us around the Horseshoe and members of the community care about. One question, I have not watched the meeting. Did they discuss how much Cambridge residents would have to pay for their municipal broadband in the future?
No, that was not a short, simple answer. I think there's a real question of the type of program you pursue. That was at least what the panelists discussed. Do you go down a more like public-private partnership where you have the utility companies run part of it, or do you run something more truly public sector in that sense? So there wasn't a cost, but obviously there is a scalability that's different. Cambridge is also in a unique position where I think they only have one service provider versus us, we have two, and in some pockets of Somerville, I think we technically have three. So apples and oranges, definitely hard to compare, but if there was anybody we were going to compare ourselves to, Cambridge financially going down this path is probably the best versus a number of the conversations we've had in committee. Most of the communities that have pursued municipal broadband, I think we all know, are like rural, less urban, less dense communities that have real deficits of access. We of course have that in Somerville, but it's different if you're comparing like somewhere out in Western Mass to Somerville. So, full steam ahead, Cambridge, do it so we can follow in your footsteps.
Thank you. Yeah, I mean, I for one am tired of getting ripped off on the price of internet and broadband, and the idea that our neighboring city would be getting it cheap or free, and our residents would continue with the market rate is not a reality I look forward to, so we're going to have to continue pushing that train. Councilor Wilson.
Thank you, Mr. President. I'll just say public option.
All right, thank you all.
The next item will be item 6F, a report of the Special Committee on School Building Facilities and Maintenance, meeting in joint session with the School Committee's Finance and Facilities Subcommittee on May 1st, 2023.
Councilor Gomez-Mocad.
So we had a little bit of a lengthy meeting. It was a 2-hour meeting. All members were present, including, we had some late incomers, but we had a full members from the school committee as well as the council. We got an update on the school buildings feasibility study, including Kennedy getting it. I think the chiller is there as we speak, and looking at Healy and Kennedy potentially starting construction in FY24. They're starting to move now to doing kind of studies or testing out systems in Capuano and Argenciano is next on the line. We had quite a few items listed about school building planning, specifically the Brown and the Winter Hill. Director Rach gave us a presentation in which he talked about, upon an order I had put in, explaining all the planning steps. I urge my colleagues to look at this presentation and start educating themselves on the MSBA process. Basically, he put a 5-phase process where this year we're looking at building capacity and enrollment study. Then we follow into a gap analysis. Then it's phase 3, which is the feasibility study per MSBA. We go into phase 4, design. And looking at phase 5 construction, that would be 2027. Again, funding dependent as the forecast. I've been looking at other projects. I'm particularly interested in one in Chelsea because it's one that's phased using the same building but phasing it out, meaning the site but taking chunks of building at once. And I can tell you from the feasibility study to the first phase, it took it was from 2013 to 2016, and then the final phase was 2018, so that doesn't say the earlier. So I'm looking the way I'm seeing a lot of the MSBA projects are taking 5 or 6 years. So this seemed, in a way, reasonable. I know the general public is still a little concerned and frustrated, but I think as you dig into the MSBA, you start asking. We also asked, is a project manager dedicated? So they have hired a new project manager. She's an architect from Ward 7 who has school children in the system. So I think, to me, this is a very, and talking to Mayor Ballantyne, she has a lot of background in green buildings. So I think that's a positive addition to that. So after going fully in depth into that, we talked a little bit about East Somerville School. There was some concerns in the mechanical systems and noise coming there. They've tested it. We comply with the ordinance. It shouldn't be an issue. We didn't have an update on school buildings. We asked for a quarterly report on any big issues. We didn't have anything to report there. We talked about the field house, and basically is they have a lot of that rubber flooring. In case something happens, they can replace it. We talked at length too about the surfaces we use in school parks and playgrounds. I'll say the essence of it is our kids could play in the snow. The problem is all our kids don't have the proper clothing for snow. So I'm going to start a nonprofit where I give everybody proper boots and snow pants. It's like, that's my dream. But the issue is that you need to provide that softer rubber material anytime you have a play structure. And then once you get out of there, that material can't be shoveled. It really, the warranty's gone, you're going to destroy the material. So it's really, for a limited time, you can't shovel the snow. So that's where we're at, and I ask that you accept this note as submitted. Thank you.
Thank you very much, Counselor, and thank you for your work on this committee and everyone who serves on that. And I'll just say, at this past Monday of this week, the school committee, these chambers were packed with folks demanding more transparency around the Winter Hill process, and the school committee voted unanimously on a resolution that, to summarize it, basically says we are not going to vote on the 1895 building until we are satisfied that there's a plan in place that satisfies this committee. So just so everyone is up to speed, I think it is absolutely moving in the right direction, and I'm really glad that these lines of communication are open and are generating forward progress. That committee report is accepted.
Next item is item 7.1.
Mr. President, I'd like to move to waive the readings of items 7.1 to 7.4 and items 10.4 and 10.5, and ask those to be sent to Finance. Thanks.
Those items are referred to Finance. Thank you.
That will bring us to item 7.5.
Let's waive the readings of 7.5 through 7.7 and refer those to confirmation of appointments.
Thank you. So the next item is item 8.1, an officer's communication from the Director of Water and Sewer conveying the fiscal year 2024 water and sewer rate proposal.
That item is referred to the Finance Committee.
The next item is item 8.3, an officer's communication from the city clerk submitting amendments to the proposed charter to address scrivener's errors.
Thank you to the city clerk's office for this work. This item is referred to the Charter Review Committee.
And that brings us to item 9.1.
Councillor Burnley.
Can you hear me?
Yes.
Okay, thank you. In lieu of my communications issues, I will not be doing my usual airline report of items, and I will only say I'd like to waive the readings of items 9.1 through 9.45 and ask that they be approved with the exceptions of items 9.2 and 9.25, which I'm asking to go to licenses and permits.
Seeing no discussion, those items are approved or referred to committee as indicated.
Excellent. So the next item before the council is item 9.46, a public communication from 138 registered voters submitting a petition requesting a public hearing regarding transparency in the development process.
So colleagues, this petition requests a public hearing before the full city council, so I'm going to schedule that at our next meeting, 2 weeks from now. And we will look forward to hosting the sponsors of this petition.
So we'll lay that item on the table.
We'll lay that item on the table. Thank you.
Item 10.1 is an order by Councilor Gomez-Mocad that this city council conduct a public hearing on the programming, planning, and design process and schedule for the Winter Hill Community Innovation School and the Benjamin Brown School.
Councilor Gomez-Mocad.
Yeah, so following requests from the community, I know many have testified as a school committee. I invited the Winter Hill community, and I'm also including the Brown School in there to come testify about their concerns about the design process scheduled for the Winter Hill, as sharing the committee that sees the oversight of the school buildings. I think it's important that we hear directly from them, so I would refer this to the School Building Maintenance Facilities Committee.
Excellent. That item is referred to the School Buildings Committee.
Item 10.2 is an order by Councilor Gomez-Mocad that the Director of Planning, Preservation, and Zoning reevaluate the green score, Section 10.4, in the zoning ordinances for neighborhood residential districts and consider implementing a percentage for pervious and green space requirements.
Councilor Gomez-Mocad.
So I want to thank my daughter for making me think this through. I used her environmental science AP class for this. So I'm noticing, I've been noticing around this, particularly for triple deckers and two families. I'm noticing that there's pervious pavers in the back, and it becomes basically a de facto parking. From a design perspective, this typology was designed to have some sort of green space in the back, or even if it wasn't designed to be a parking in the back. I think the other thing I heard, I had a resident doing a renovation, a small renovation, and they say you have to do a green score, and it has to be signed off by a landscape architect. And I think these smaller developments, that seems a little bit of overkill. I also am looking at the green score and seeing that the value given for a pervious paver with 24 inches of pervious surface below is almost the same as a planting bed of the same. It's a 0.5 multiplier versus a 0.6. And this leads me to believe that we're giving almost equal value to pavers. Pavers are man-made. Pavers don't have the same, if we're talking about heat islands, they don't have the same albedo effect. I know it seems to be very focused on stormwater drainage, and it forgets, to me, in my opinion, heat islands and the fact that we're dealing with a man-made material no matter what. It's different to have greenery, it's different to have trees. So I think we really need to look at this from a more simplistic way, especially in this smaller site. So I would like to bring this up to the Land Use Committee.
Excellent. This item is referred to the Committee on Land Use.
Item 10.3 is an order by Councilor Gomez-Mocad that the Director of Planning, Preservation, and Zoning reconsider the height limits in neighborhood residence districts as listed in Section 10.2.2C, arbor or trellis, to align with the minimum floor-to-floor heights for each principal building type.
Somebody was trying to build an arbor or a trellis, and it was going to be a little bit higher than 8 feet, and they had to go for a variance. It just seems to me a little bit, a bit much, and I think our minimum is 10 feet, and I'm going 2 feet higher. I don't think it's an issue. And what I'm trying to do is look at places in our zoning ordinance where it kind of overcomplicates things, especially for the smaller developments. I want to make sure they're simplified, so this is a little detailed item I like to bring up. And when I talk to ISD, they're like, why are we going for a variance for this? The same thing I want to bring up, or the last item I brought up, it really overcomplicates, again, for the ISD, the design review process.
Excellent. We will refer this item to land use as well.
The next item before the council is item 10.6, a public event for Holy Festival on May 14th from 1 p.m. to 5 p.m.
That item is approved.
We just missed that one earlier, right? That brings us to the end of the agenda for the evening, Mr. President.
Any late items?
There is one late item before the council. I have an ordinance from Councilor Scott amending the Code of Ordinances, Section 2-323, salary ranges to provide cost of living adjustments for school committee members and city councilors.
Councilor Scott.
Thank you, Mr. President. I was really looking forward to our presentation from the person who was running our wage study. Again, this is something that I've been looking forward to for a very long time. Back in April, I asked for a copy of the RFP that would lay out the scope of the study, because we were told that there would be a study, and of course, elected officials would be adjusted along with that. Unfortunately, from what I can see, there is nothing in that study about elected officials. It's not in the RFP. I was hoping to be able to ask the question tonight, but given that we're about to launch into budget season, I felt it was appropriate to draft this amendment and have it referred to Finance Committee. Thank you, Mr. Chair.
Thank you, Councilor Scott. That item, Councilor Wilson would like to sign on.
I have a late item.
Okay, and we'll refer that to the Finance Committee. Councilor Gomez-Moacad.
So I want to make an observation. I was in a committee the other day, and there was a female director where about 12 times it was said it's about leadership. It made me think that when we're here in council, we talk about not attacking each other or commenting on each other. And when you talk about leadership with women, it's a very loaded question, comment. The synonyms for leadership are always hensman, kingsman, master, higher up, lead man, dominator, overlord, king. And when you tell a woman that, it has a really strong connotation on it. And I think it's not, also, it seems very appropriate to counselor to tell a program director it's about leadership. It's not, everybody has their own style of leadership, everybody does. I think we should be more concrete on like, look, you're not seeing the issue, can we think of it this way or that way? And as we're going into budget season, talking to different directors, I think we need to be careful, and I might have done this myself, by the way, probably. But it made me think, can we, the same way we have a certain level of respect for each other when we were talking to department heads, let's be concrete on the things we want them to do, and we wanted them to change instead of pointing out a character item. That's all I ask. It's my observation as a woman. And I particularly, this one director, I happen to have worked with her in the past when I was in Cambridge. So I understand the passion this person has for their job, and I was a little taken aback by that. And again, we do things sometimes inadvertently. I know I do. I'm not perfect, and I'm just trying to make us a more sort of progressive, understanding, and collaborative council. And I think, I even tell my constituents all the time, just don't say, I'm angry about this or so. You be concrete and say what you want. That's all. And I don't mean to offend or point fingers. It's an observation. Thank you.
Yes, the clerk requests that you send in writing the title of the order, so there's something for the agenda. Thank you. Councilor Strezzo.
Thank you. I would like to very much, Mr. President, through you to my colleague, I'd like to commend you and just validate you for saying that and how vitally important it is. And it reminds me of my first term on confirmation of appointments committee, when there was a very accomplished firefighter, female, and in that committee meeting, she was going up for lieutenant. And the questions that she was asked of were, what was it like to be a mom? And how hard is this that you're doing this with having kids and being a wife in 2021, mind you, 2021. This wasn't like 20 years ago. And all she wanted to talk about was fire prevention. And by the way, a year later, she won an Award of Valor, awarded by the governor. The governor. She was recognized as one of the most accomplished firefighters in the whole state. And in a Somerville confirmation of appointments committee, she was being asked about how hard it was to be a mom, and not her accomplishments, and not her work, not the fact that a year later she rescued an elderly man and broke her leg doing it from a burning building. And she was offended by that she was asked about being a mom and being a woman. She was offended, and she was rightfully so. It was a disgusting part of a city council moment. And I would like to hope and wish that all of my colleagues and all of us collectively really check in with our internalized biases. And as we go into another finance committee season, that we really check that and really check our implicit biases. Thank you.
Thank you. Seeing no further business before the council, we have to do a roll call vote, don't we?
Pick up a whole bunch of items off of the table for approval. Items 1.3, 3.1, 4.1 to 4.2, 4.5 to 4.12, 6A, 6C through 6F, 7.8, 9.1, 9.3 through 9.24, 9.26 to 9.45, 10.1 to 10.3, 10.6, and 2 late items, and to place on file 4.14 to 4.16, 8.2, and 9.47.
And to adjourn.
Sure, and we'll do that too, and to adjourn.
Nice try, keeping it.
On those items, Councilor McLaughlin. Shall I read them again individually? Councilor Davis.
Yes.
Councilor Scott.
Yes.
Councilor Strezzo.
Yes.
Councilor Klingon. Councilor Wilson.
Yes.
Councilor Burnley.
Aye. Aye.
Councilor Gomez Moca.
Yes.
Councilor Kelly.
Yes.
Councilor Pineda Newfeld. Councilor Ewan Campen.
Yes.
With 9 councilors in favor, none opposed, and 2 absent, those items are approved and placed on file as indicated, and the City Council is adjourned.
Thank you all.
I know. You can ask Matt for his vote.
Good night, Councilor Burnley. Thank you.
Mike.
Sweatshirt in here. That says it. I
I
remember
didn't hear any of that.
we're not allowed to wear sweatshirts.
Oh, I don't know if you're
Oh, well,
teasing
this
me.
was-